Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Michael. You're not Michael.
Please do not try to hide your disappointment. I am not Michael. I think Michael had maybe had better things to do today. I am a woefully sad replacement, but I'll try to do my best, Jenny.
You just took all the fun out of making fun of you, Andrew Speno.
I owe you another apology then.
You do. Please. That's just the worst. I was going to make so much fun of you, and then no, it didn't work out. You cut to the chase. Well, Julie says, "Good morning, Andrew."
When you're making fun of me, far be it from me to interrupt. Please continue.
We have to take this down so that everybody can see your background. So who were you in the Brady Bunch, Andrew?
Oh, I was Alice. I did most of the housework and made dinner and kept order and made wisecracks every now and then. We had clearly defined roles in my household growing up.
Okay, so do you want to tell your joke?
Oh, no.
Okay. All right, well, I was just thinking we were talking earlier before we came on. We were talking about Andrew's one good joke.
The only joke I've ever written. But we'll save that for my next appearance.
Okay. Because I blew the joke like really bad. And then it was kind of embarrassing because I blew the joke so bad.
Well, see, that's the thing. You have to have an intimate knowledge of the Brady Bunch, maybe an encyclopedic knowledge. Yeah, well, yeah, they had a dog named Tiger.
Yeah, well, I didn't remember the dog. Yeah, I didn't remember the dog. I knew they didn't have a cat. But then when you told me Tiger, now see, he was only in like the first season, I think, right?
Yeah. I think Jan was allergic to him once, but I think
that's right.
If memory serves, the dog, the actor dog died and they never replaced him.
No.
And so he just kind of disappeared. But they left the doghouse out in the backyard for all 5 seasons, which
I never thought about that, but that's true. Yeah.
It's spooky stuff.
Okay, so Julia's she's already into I shouldn't have said anything. Now Lisa's like, tell the dang joke.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll need you to participate. Okay. TV trivia question. What is the name of the dog on the Brady Bunch?
Tiger.
No, I'm sorry. It was Alice.
Still funny the second time. But I like the fact that I actually remembered Tiger this time, so I didn't blow the joke too bad.
I appreciate you setting me up.
And Lisa was like, Tiger. Okay,
that's the only joke I've written in my entire life, and I think it shows.
Well, it was a great joke.
Thank you.
All right, because Alice was a dog. Who am I to say? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So Michael is very disappointed. He really wanted to be here this morning because he's been studying Lincoln like you have. Okay. And he wanted to be here so badly, and he's got a 9 o'clock meeting this morning. And I told him to quit his job, but
some people's priorities are out of whack.
To Lauren and the kids.
Yeah, it's a shame, really, that people don't understand what's important.
It's my thought. So he sent me a whole bunch of. He sent me a video and he sent me a slide. So I'm going to put the slide up. He sent me several slides, but I'm going to put this one up.
Okay.
What I would most desire would be the separation of the white and black races. So this was Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So let me pull in another one because unfortunately the way I had to do it was not the easiest way. All right. Let me pull in another one. All right. And this one says, I, as well as Judge Douglas, am in favor of the race to which I belong having the superior position.
That is an accurate quote, yes. And he's referring to Stephen Douglas. And I assume that quote was from one of the Lincoln Douglas debates.
Okay. So already this isn't the Lincoln I know. So this is interesting for me. All right. So here's another one.
Okay.
Maybe. Where did it go? There it is. I am not forever having been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races.
Yes, that is absolutely a quote from Lincoln. Now, I will say that the views that Lincoln had on race were held by 99% of the population at that time. So it's not like he was an outlier by today's standards. Yeah, he was a racist, right? But that was really what most people thought at that time, North and South.
Yeah, but I think, and Lisa says the Lincoln we thought we knew isn't necessarily the one who was. Let me show. He's got another couple of quotes in here. Let me.
Okay, well, don't steal all my material.
Well, I hope I'm not.
Okay.
I will to the very last stand by the law of the state, which forbids the marrying of white people with Negroes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That was also from the Lincoln Douglas debates. And just for background, the Lincoln Douglas debates were a series of debates held in Illinois when Lincoln and Douglas were both running for a Senate seat in 58.
Did you read them all?
Did I read all the Lincoln Douglas debates?
Yeah.
Oh, no, no. I mean,
Okay.
there's a lot. There are transcripts, but I had access to them because I went to college in Central Illinois, and Lincoln was revered.
Yeah.
Um, and at my college, one of the Lincoln Douglas debates was held there.
Oh, yeah.
We still had a desk that was especially bought for the debate. It was in our fraternity, and we had a Lincoln library. So yeah, I was neck deep in the Lincoln is God theory, but in the last couple years, I think most Americans are questioning things we never thought to question before, these popular narratives. And while I think cynicism is unhealthy, I think skepticism is very healthy.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Can you give me the idea of what skepticism and cynicism, what's the difference there? Because sometimes I feel like I'm more cynical, but I can't put my finger on exactly what the difference is between the two of them.
It's kind of a fine line. I'd say skepticism is a healthy view of not blindly accepting everything that's told to you, whereas cynicism is a blanket rejection of everything that's told to you.
Can I be in the middle?
Yeah, probably most people are, but it's so interesting how that tide has turned in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
If you had told me 10 years ago that the Center for Disease Control uh, was doing what it was actually doing, I never would have believed you. In fact, it wouldn't be that I don't believe you; it's that I can't believe you. There's no way that's true. But what we're finding out within the last 10 years is that so much of what we've been told and so much of what has been accepted as truth in American culture is actually not true. And so
Well, just say it. It's a lie.
yeah, it's a lie. So I just out of boredom one day started. I've always been kind of into Lincoln, especially the Lincoln assassination, and I could talk about that for hours, but I won't bore you with that. Although maybe you should have me back because it has an Oklahoma tie to it. But
Oh, cool. Yes. Then yes.
um, I just started going back and re-examining these things, these popular narratives that everyone accepts. And so I'm putting together a series of presentations like this. This one's on Lincoln. I have one showing that Helen Keller was a fraud, that the bombing of London of World War II was Winston Churchill's fault. Um, It's once you start digging into the
Wow.
historical records, and I'm not a trained historian, but I was an investigative reporter for 20 years, so I know how to deep dive into research and compile information. And so I just started looking into Lincoln, and when most people, at least I know when I did, when I heard the name Abraham Lincoln, for the first 50 years of my life. Uh, the thoughts that came to my mind, honest, noble,
Well, yeah, Honest
savior of the
Abe.
union. Yeah, the man who freed the slaves, the greatest president we've ever had. And this is universally accepted across the political spectrum. And uh, more books have been written about Lincoln than any other American. And 99% of those books have the exact same narrative that Lincoln was America's greatest president. But there's a handful of these books that offer a competing narrative that Abraham Lincoln may have been America's worst president ever. And so when you have two competing narratives from two credible sources, what do? You turn to the evidence. Okay. The evidence will tell you what the
Oh, I
truth
thought
is.
the answer was you picked the one you liked the best.
Hopefully, you do that after you see the evidence. But the fundamental question, I guess, is even though 99.9% of Americans believe Lincoln was a great president, does that make it true? So I broke it down into the four most popular beliefs about Lincoln and examined whether which narrative was accurate. So can I tell you the four criteria I looked
Of
at?
course.
Okay. So I'll break it down into pro-Lincoln and anti-Lincoln arguments. Okay. So a pro-Lincoln would be the South started the Civil War by firing on Fort Sumter. Okay. But then there's a narrative that the South did not start the Civil War, Lincoln did. Another popular one is that Lincoln saved America by holding the Union together. Countering narrative is Lincoln had no right to force the states to stay in the Union. Pro, Lincoln had a deep reverence for the U.S. Constitution. Anti-argument, Lincoln trashed the U.S. Constitution. And then the biggest one of all, number four, is that Lincoln freed the slaves. The counter narrative is Lincoln did not free the slaves. So whenever you're ready, I can go through these one by one. Now, I have to say, I'm a little nervous doing this because someone could see this and say, this guy is so radical. He hates Abraham Lincoln. And that's the only narrative that goes out there. But
Well, Julie is not, because she says he did trash the Constitution. So Julie is already on board with you.
Okay. Well, I love Julia, so I'm glad I have at least one ally on my side going in. But again, this is just an examination of the facts.
Well, here's the thing. And before we start, I just want to say this. The very first thing this morning, I saw somebody write something in favor of an organization, something an organization had published. So an organization published it, and then, the person was in favor of it. And we get into this habit where if it says conservative or it has an R by it, or we think or these people have done something good in one sense, automatically they're all good. I mean, and so we don't question what they say because they're, pretty much all good. And if this podcast does anything, all I want it for it to do is to educate people, but not just that, to make people examine the narratives that they're swallowing without thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a healthy way to look at history, and it's an honest way to look at history. Let's take George Washington, for example, who, by any objective measure, was a hero and the founder of the country. What is Washington's singular virtue in history? It was honesty, right? George Washington could not tell a lie. But what made him such a masterful military commander was that he was a genius at deception. Now, he did it for all the right reasons. and that's part of war. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that these people were virtuous in a way that no one else was, and
They
and
weren't God on earth.
no, yeah, exactly. And Lincoln, as much as we revere him and venerate him and built statues and put it on license plates in Illinois, land of Lincoln, I'm not sure we have the whole picture.
Okay, so gave the four, so let's
Okay.
go through the four.
Okay. All right. So let's start with who started the Civil War. All right. So it's 1861. South Carolina's legislature had voted to leave the Union. Okay. 4 months later, Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. This is a U.S. Army installation occupied by Union troops. South Carolina asked them to leave, and the Union troops refused. Okay. So on April 12th, after months of diplomatic efforts, South Carolina finally loses their patience, starts firing their cannons. U.S. troops fire back. There's a 34-hour battle. The Union troops surrender and agree to evacuate. The war is now on. Okay. Are we on the same page so far? Okay, yeah, that's
Well, I'll
just
be honest, I'm not very good with history. So I'm
okay.
gonna
We'll take my word for it. Okay,
until you say something that I'm like, I'm not sure about that. I'm gonna go with it.
okay, but it's commonly known that the Civil War started at Fort Sumter in Charleston,
Yes.
South Carolina.
Okay.
So here's a question for you: how many Union casualties were there at Fort Sumter?
I would have no
Z-
idea.
Zero.
Okay.
Zero deaths, zero injuries.
For
The
everybody or just the Union?
On both sides.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
now
So they were
after the
really bad shots.
no, they were very good shots, and I'll explain this. Okay. Now, I a little footnote here is that after the surrender, the Union troops wanted to give a 100 gun salute to their commander, and out of respect, South Carolina said, "Okay." In doing so, a cannon round exploded prematurely, and one Union soldier
Oh,
died. But this was not a battlefield death. This was
right.
an accident.
Yeah.
And here's kind of a little fun fact: is that among the Union soldiers at Fort Sumter during that battle was Captain Abner Doubleday. Do you recognize that name?
Yeah.
The man who would go on to invent baseball. It's just a fun fact. Okay,
That is.
so there were zero casualties at Fort Sumter. So think about this. South Carolina has 40 cannons firing on this fort, and no one was hurt. Why? It's because South Carolina did not occupy on the or did not fire on the occupied parts of the fort. They
Oh,
had
okay.
they had no desire to harm the troops there. Now the fact is, South Carolina, those troops could have surrounded that fort and slaughtered everyone inside, but they didn't want to. They didn't want to kill anyone. They just wanted them to leave. Okay, so having said that, what prompted the first shot when South Carolina fired on Fort Sumter? Okay. Well, there were diplomatic negotiations going on between DC and South Carolina. And South Carolina agreed to allow Union supply ships to come to Fort Sumter so that the Union troops wouldn't starve to death. South Carolina wished no harm on these people, just wanted them to leave. But South Carolina had a condition on that. We'll allow supply ships in, but no warships. Supply
Hmm.
ships are fine. Warships signal an intention to escalate. President Buchanan, who was Lincoln's predecessor, agreed to this. Congress agreed. Lincoln's cabinet agreed. Everyone on both sides was expecting and actively working toward a diplomatic resolution to this. So, what did Lincoln do? Lincoln sent 3 warships along with a
Ah,
supply ship. It was a provocation. Lincoln antagonized South Carolina into firing that first shot, and it worked. Lincoln got the war that he wanted. Okay? So Lincoln
so
then,
back up. So why didn't Lincoln want the war?
we'll get into that. Okay.
Oh,
We'll,
you're
we'll, we'll,
teasing me.
we'll
Okay, I
get
get
into what Lincoln's motivations were for starting this war. So,
it.
okay, so Lincoln, so as the troops left Fort Sumter, they took the flag that was flying over the fort. They brought it back to D.C. and it went on a national tour. And it was displayed all over the country in New York City. It was displayed. There were about 100,000 people in the crowd, the New York Times estimated at the time, and it was used as propaganda to build support for the war. What people did not know at that time was that within 4 years of Fort Sumter, 750,000 Americans would die in military service, 500,000 be wounded but not killed, and the economies of 11 states would be destroyed. Okay. So the
Yeah.
conclusion made there is that the South really didn't start the Civil War, Lincoln did. Okay. So that brings us to our second bone of contention, which is, did the states have the right to secede from the Union? Okay. Now let's make this clear. The Civil War was not a fight over slavery. And we'll get into that into some detail.
Yeah, I hope so, because that's my biggest beef about people, because I believe that according to the Constitution, they could have seceded. I mean, that was what our state was for. So the whole thing. So that was always my belief. So that then we get into this argument about, well, it was all over slaves, but it wasn't about slaves. So yes, I definitely want to talk about that.
The abolition of slavery was never a stated goal by the Union, by the military, or by Lincoln at any point during the war. The Civil War was a fight over whether states had a right to leave the Union. Now, here's what's interesting, which no one ever said this to me, before I started doing research, was that before 1861, it was universally understood that states had a constitutional right to secede. And the founding fathers considered it the ultimate check on federal government. Okay. Now, how do we know this? Let's start with the Federalist Papers. Okay, a little background on the Federalist Papers. To go back a little bit, after the Revolutionary War, the federal government was operating under the Articles of Confederation. It established a weak federal government to the point really of being dysfunctional. So we need a new constitution to establish a federal government, but then each of the 13 states had to ratify it to join the Union. So the Federalist Papers were written by three men, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, and they were letters written to state legislatures trying to persuade them to sign the Constitution and address specific concerns that people had. So like Federalist Paper number 10 is the famous one about the tyranny of the majority. There were concerns, all right, well, if we have a democracy and if 51% of the people decide that, my farm is now theirs, I'm not on board with this. So this was a letter written saying, no, that cannot happen because we have these protections in the Constitution. Federalist Papers 47 and 51. These were about separations of power to guarantee, because a lot of them had concern, wait a minute, this chief executive that you're describing, this has the markings of a king, which we just separated from, we don't want. So these papers were explaining, no, this is a guarantee against authoritarian government and the Bill of Rights. And then particularly Federalist Paper number 39, which established a federal form of government. Okay. And so I'll quote here, let me read. So in this paper, it's written, each state in ratifying the Constitution is considered as a sovereign body, independent of all others, and only to be bound by its own voluntary act. Okay. So imagine you're in a state legislature in New Hampshire. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. Okay. So you're in New Hampshire.
Alice didn't bring that in for you either. Where is Alice? Dang it.
She stays on the margins where she belongs. Okay. So imagine that these Federalist Papers, you're a lawmaker in New Hampshire or, Virginia or wherever. And you receive one of these Federalist Papers saying, look, I'm going to assuage your concerns. This Constitution guarantees that this federal government cannot get out of hand. And then at the end of the letter, there was a PS. And it said, PS, once you join this union of states, you cannot leave. And if you try to leave, you give this new federal government the authority to do the following: conscript an army, invade your state, blockade your ports, kill 4% of your population, injure or maim 16% of your state's population, destroy 40% of your property, put your state under military occupation, strip your citizens of the right to elect their senators and representatives, and then force your state at gunpoint to rejoin the Union on new terms you would never agree to. If that was included in or as Julia says, rape your women and burn your property, absolutely, that took place. Union troops absolutely pillaged the South. If that were included in those Federalist Papers, how many states do you think would have ratified this new Constitution under those terms? Exactly. The answer is zero. And how do we know it?
Because they didn't want to join in the first place. People don't realize that. They didn't even want to do this in the first place.
Right. They were very skeptical of a powerful federal government, rightfully so. And so how do we know that they would never agree to this? Well, let's take a look at history. Now, since 1787, several northern states considered secession from the Union. Okay, let me give you a few examples. So I have to read here. The Massachusetts legislature in 1808, in response to the Embargo Act, debated secession. The Hartford Convention, which included Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, these representatives met to discuss secession. Massachusetts again in 1842, Massachusetts again in 1844.
And now look at it.
Yeah, the Worcester Disunion Convention in 1857 called for secession over slavery. These are northern states who wanted to secede over slavery. Indiana, New York, and Michigan had similar conventions. Even New York City in 1861, the mayor appealed to city council to secede from the Union to avoid participation in the Civil War. Okay?
Wow.
Here's what's interesting. In every one of those conventions and in those discussions, the transcripts are available. The question of whether they had the right to secede was never a part of their debates or discussions. Nowhere in those transcripts does a single Northerner question whether they could secede. They debated whether they should secede. Now, obviously, they chose not to, but it was universally understood that states had the right to bow out if they wanted. So if the southern states did not have the right to secede, oh, shoot, did I lose you there?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hold on. My monitor blanked out for a second. Okay, I think we're back. Okay. So if the southern states did not have the right to secede, then their secession was never valid.
Yeah.
You know, the Union's position was the Confederate States never left the Union. That's why it's called the Civil War, right? So that begs the question, once the war was over, why did Confederate States have to reapply for entry back into the Union?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now ultimately the secession question was settled after the Civil War in a Supreme Court case. It was Texas v. White in 1869, and the court ruled that secession was unconstitutional, but this was an ex post facto ruling. This was made after the Civil War. So it was really, it was already decided on the battlefield. The court just affirmed what the war had decided. So the verdict here is states had the right to secede from the Union, and Lincoln had no constitutional authority to stop them. Okay? So that brings us to number 3, the Constitution. Did Lincoln preserve the Constitution or did he violate it? Okay? So let's take a look at the First Amendment. Right? First Amendment, what does it cover? Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to redress grievances. And these are all principles founded in the right to question and criticize our elected leaders. Can we agree on that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let's take a look at how Lincoln...
100%.
100%. So let's take a look at how Lincoln responded to his critics. Okay. First thing Lincoln did was to put all telegraph wires out of D.C., which telegraph was the primary medium for transmitting news across the country at that time. Lincoln put all telegraph wires under military control and censorship. Okay? Scores of newspapers that were critical of the war, this is in the North, newspapers in the North that were critical of the war were barred from using the U.S. Postal Service. Okay? It gets worse. This is going to get progressively worse, Jenny. Lincoln used the military to shut down more than 300 newspapers in the North at gunpoint, and in most cases confiscated or destroyed their printing presses. And among his victims, a guy named Francis Key Howard. He was the grandson of Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star Spangled Banner.
Mm-hmm.
So Francis Key Howard was the co-editor of the Baltimore Exchange. And after criticizing the mass casualties of the war, because the casualties were unprecedented, because the Civil War was this confluence of old world battle tactics with industrial revolution weapons, and the casualties no one saw coming. So this newspaper, these two editors were criticizing how many casualties there were. So Lincoln shipped Howard and his co-editor off to prison without trial. He shut down the Yes, Lincoln shut down the St. Louis State Journal and arrested the editor Joseph Tucker for criticizing the war. Then Lincoln went full tilt. It was May 18th, 1864. He issued an executive order, and the executive order was titled Arrest and Imprisonment of Irresponsible Newspaper Reporters and Editors.
Oh my gosh. So, everything that happened during COVID was built on this.
Yes. And this is going to come full circle to what we have today. But here's the thing. So we're talking about these newspaper editors, but they were just a fraction of the 13,000 Northerners who were arrested under Lincoln's martial law.
13,000, Andrew, really?
13,000. So how was he able to do this? Arrest and imprison 13,000 United States citizens in the North. How did he do this? He suspended habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. Are you familiar with? Okay, so basically, habeas corpus, the Latin phrase, it means you should have the body, is what it means. So basically, the court must be able to put eyes on a person being detained. So it gives citizens who are charged with a crime the right to appear before a judge, have their charges read to them, let the judge determine whether the government has the right to detain this person. So like an example would be, let's say you insult a policeman and he arrests you. You appear before the judge, the prosecutor says, you are charged with hurting this cop's feelings. Well, the judge would immediately point out that hurting someone's feelings is not a crime, and the judge would order the police to release you right away.
Wait, are you sure? Do you know where we live right now?
I'm saying this is how it's supposed to work. So yeah, the judge would release you immediately. Lincoln took this right away. So he suspended habeas corpus in April of 1861, at the very outset of the war.
Wow.
And okay, so July 4th, 1861, Lincoln authorized every military commander to unilaterally, and I'm quoting here, arrest and detain without resort to the ordinary processes and forms of law, such individuals as he might deem dangerous to public safety. So any military officer can arrest and detain any U.S. citizen for whatever reason that they deem to be dangerous to public safety. So no charges, no arraignment, no trial, no verdict, no appeal. Thousands of U.S. civilians were imprisoned for months or even years because of this decree. Lincoln aborted due process. Okay. Here's another.
And it's so interesting. I hate to interrupt because.
No, please.
But honestly, it's so interesting, Andrew, when you put together what you're saying with what we've just seen happen in the last 5 to 7 years, and you just think it is coming full circle. And I do think part of it is happening because people don't know history. And I'll be honest, I mean, I'm self-taught history, and I feel like I know probably more than the average bear, but I don't even know what you're talking about. But all I can think of is, oh my gosh, that's just what happened to the J6ers. That's just what happened to so many people if they spoke out against Fauci and this whole, well, but COVID isn't that big of a deal. What? We're going to put you in prison then.
Right.
I mean, all of that.
Yeah. The second you're labeled a public safety threat, basically, the government takes license to remove any rights you have. Okay, now. Okay,
which is exactly the antithesis of what this country was founded on. The complete antithesis of that.
And let's take this a step further. Okay, Now, you probably remember the 2020 election and the hijinks that took place there.
No, never.
Okay. So let's talk about Missouri. Now, Missouri was a border state, which means it was a slave state that did not secede from the Union. Okay.
Right.
So here's how this played out. A local army commander in Lawrence, Kansas, took his troops, led them into Missouri, and forcibly evicted 20,000 Missouri civilians from the state. Okay. Now, in 1860, 165,000 Missourians voted in the presidential election, and Lincoln got 10% of the votes, 17,000 votes. Okay. In 1864, Lincoln's reelection campaign, 100,000 Missourians voted, and Lincoln got 70% of the vote. Lincoln cooked the books. He manipulated the population to win the state. Does that sound familiar? The parallels between that and what we've seen is uncanny. And so Lincoln used the military to intimidate judges and elected leaders. I'll give you a few more examples. He threatened the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, with arrest after he ruled that Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus was unconstitutional, a ruling Lincoln completely ignored. Lincoln arrested and imprisoned almost half of Maryland state legislators without trial.
What?
Yeah, because Maryland was going to secede from the Union. It was a slave state. And so if Maryland had seceded, Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by Virginia and Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
So what's an easy fix to that? Arrest half of the Maryland legislature without trial, without charges, to make sure that they can't secede. Okay.
But can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what was Lincoln's ultimate reasoning for why he didn't want any states seceding?
We will answer that question. Okay.
Okay. You better.
Bear with me. Okay. So let me give one example because this was particularly outrageous. So there was a congressman from Ohio. His name was Clement Vallandigham. People had much better names back then. Clement Vallandigham was arrested. This is a sitting U.S. congressman from a northern state. He was arrested, put in front of a military tribunal because he gave a speech opposing the war.
Wow.
And in Vallandigham's defense, the governor of New York, Horatio Seymour, another great name. So the governor of New York wrote a letter decrying what he called Lincoln's military despotism. But it didn't matter. Vallandigham was taken by force and dumped behind Confederate lines. This was the beginning of lawfare. This was lawfare before lawfare was cool. The conclusion being Lincoln, it depends which side you're on. Lincoln trashed the Constitution and abused his power.
Wow.
Okay, so now we're going to get to the most fun part that you were asking about, which did Lincoln free the slaves? Okay. So the Civil War is often called the war to free the slaves. We've all heard that.
Or as Julia said up here, it was called the Northern War of Aggression until very recently in Alabama and Mississippi.
Well, that's what my wife and I were talking about because we both went to high school in Virginia, and this was in the 80s. And back then, the history books that we had in our classroom called it the war between the states.
Okay.
But as we know, it's often called the war to free the slaves. Right? And while the abolition of slavery was undoubtedly an effect of the Civil War, it was never the purpose of the Civil War. As we mentioned before, freeing the slaves was never once stated as an objective of the war by Congress, by the War Department, or by Lincoln. Okay? And in fact, you were pulling up Lincoln quotes earlier. Here's another fun one that Lincoln said on August 22nd, 1862. So this is 18 months into the war. Here's his quote. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. That was Abraham Lincoln 18 months into the war. So then you ask, well, wait a minute, what about the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves? Okay. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation, as we know it today, is actually the second version of it that Lincoln wrote. The first version, which Lincoln drafted in September of 1862, allowed Southern states to keep their slaves if they rejoined the Union. It was only in January 1863, so about 4 months later, after none of the Southern states accepted this offer, that Lincoln drafted the version that we know today. Okay?
Really?
Yes. So let's take a look at the actual text of the Emancipation Proclamation as we know it. Right? It says, "And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are and henceforward shall be free." So, in which states was he abolishing slavery? It was only the Confederate states and only certain parts of those states. So, after the Emancipation Proclamation, here's where slaves were not declared free. In the border states, Maryland had 87,000 slaves, not freed. Kentucky had 225,000 slaves, not freed. Missouri had 115,000, not freed. West Virginia, 18,000, not freed. And Washington, D.C. had 3,000 slaves. They were not freed. Plus, any territories in the South under military occupation by Union troops were exempt. So it did not apply in Union occupied cities of New Orleans, Norfolk, Portsmouth, New Bern, North Carolina. It goes on and on. So when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he freed exactly 0 slaves. Okay. So
kind of makes you feel, I mean, honestly, it makes me feel kind of aggravated because we buy and swallow so much propaganda that even those of us who are pretty wise to propaganda don't know is propaganda. And it's only going to get worse because as the generations get stupider, sorry, I know it's not a word, but I like it. They're not going to go back. They don't even have the critical thinking skills or desire for knowledge to go, I wonder if that's really true. I think I'm going to go back and look that up. So it's concerning because the further away we get, the more the propaganda sticks and the less people want to go back and check to make sure it's not propaganda. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, and I would encourage you not to get stressed out about that. Because
you don't watch the show enough, Andrew.
Well, I'm a regular viewer. I love this show, but I think what you're proving through your show and would bear out throughout history is that history is written by people who show up. If 95% of the people don't show up, then 5% are going to end up kind of calling the shots.
True,
so the important thing is to show
what
up.
Robert says, and Robert's right, because then you go and you look it up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia, people don't even realize that Wikipedia is just whoever wants to write something about it. And it's just their spin on it, right?
Well, actually, Wikipedia is a little bit more than that. Yeah, it's supposed to be kind of like, a crowd source of information, but there are editors at Wikipedia who will edit and delete things that they don't like, based on political reasons, not based on fact, but based on political reasons. So yeah.
Well, I wanted to pull this back up again because Dorn says Lincoln, America couldn't afford to lose access to the Gulf of Mexico. That makes some sense.
Well, when you say couldn't afford, what does that mean?
Well, I would just think, it's a great port right? I mean, anything in the Gulf of Mexico was a port,
Right. Yeah.
right?
And New Orleans was the largest port.
Yeah, and so you couldn't lose the southern ports. I mean, there were a lot of northern port, or a lot of eastern seaboard ports.
Okay.
Boston.
Right. In response to that, I would say, number one, by ship you would still have access to the Gulf by taking the Atlantic around Florida, and if this secession by the South had been peacefully resolved, there would have been a trade agreement. Access to the Mississippi to get down to New Orleans and ship things out of there.
Right.
It's yeah, there was a lot of political motivation or there was a lot of financial motivation for the North to do what it did, but it was much more politically motivated, I think.
I don't want to get you ahead of yourself, but when are we going to find? But when are we going to find out why he didn't want this union broken up?
Okay, all right, bear with me. Okay, so let's go back to slavery,
Andrew.
Okay, so I'll speed it up. Okay, so all right, so we've established that Lincoln freed 0 slaves.
Right.
So really, the takeaway here is kind of what we were talking about, which is history books are written by the winners. And the idea that Lincoln fought the Civil War to free the slaves has no foundation in the facts. The real motivation for the Emancipation Proclamation is that England was this close to coming into the Civil War on the side of the Union, or on the side of the Confederacy. And if that had happened, it would have been game over. We would have had 2 separate countries, the US and the Confederate States. England had abolished slavery about 20 years earlier, and there was a very popular moral outrage over slavery in the UK. And so by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation and trying to frame the war as being a fight against slavery, popular support for supporting the Confederacy in England cratered. So there's a political motivation to it. But I think more important kind of came, that framing more so came after the war. It was reframed as a war of northern sacrifice to free the slaves. But it was deliberately dishonest. It was successful, but it was a dishonest operation to bestow a sense of nobility and altruism on the war. Almost everyone had a family member killed in that war. And then in the aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, people needed an altruism attached to what just happened. It was justification after the fact. And let me end this on this note about slavery, is that in the year 1800, slavery was legal in every country in the Western Hemisphere. Okay? By 1900, 100 years later, in 1900, slavery was illegal in every country in the Western Hemisphere. Not one single country went to war over slavery, and neither did we.
That's an excellent point, Andrew.
Thank you. So anyway, the verdict here is that Lincoln did not wage a war to free the slaves. Okay, but Lincoln kept the Union together, right? But he did so much more than that. He completely restructured the Union to remove power from the sovereign states and transfer that power to the federal government.
Okay, say that one more time.
Lincoln completely restructured the Union to remove power from the sovereign states and transfer that power to the federal government. So power would no longer flow up from the states to the federal government. Power would now flow from the federal government down to the states. And that was the Hamiltonian model of federal government, not the Jeffersonian model, which we had before the war. And as a result, once that war was over, the 10th Amendment, which says any powers not specifically delegated to the federal government, is under the purview of the states. The Civil War rendered the 10th Amendment meaningless. And so everything we dislike today about the overreach of the
Oh,
federal government,
Andrew,
I'm sorry
no.
to break your heart. You'll never look at a $5 bill the same way again.
No, actually, I may go get rid of them all.
Well, we're already getting rid of the penny, so
That's right.
that's one problem removed. But the fact is that everything we despise about the federal government today was made possible thanks to Abraham Lincoln. And it was done deliberately because Lincoln wanted the center of power to be in the federal government. Okay? So let me end with this. We were talking about the Lincoln Douglas debates, right? So in one of these debates, Stephen Douglas accused Lincoln of this quote. Okay. Accused Lincoln of, quote, wanting to impose on the nation a uniformity of local laws and institutions and a moral homogeneity dictated by the central government that would place at defiance the intentions of the republic's founders.
Wow.
Stephen Douglas was right. And Lincoln's vision for the United States has now been accomplished beyond anything Douglas could have possibly imagined. Now, I have to say, this is my first time giving this presentation. I can cite all the sources you need for any of the claims, but that's it. I guess I'll now take any questions you have. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but I'll take them.
Well, I was going to say, I starred this one. Julia said, I'm so glad we're talking about this in public. Thank you. Americans need to understand that history has been rewritten and memorials have been built for political reasons always.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorn said, kind of like when Bush justified freeing Kuwait. And Steph wanted to say she loved your Brady Bunch background.
Okay.
And Lisa says this presentation should be required in every high school history class all 4 years. And you know what? I mean, Lisa is a friend and I love Lisa. And that's part of the reason why I completely concur, because it has always bugged me. You know, I bought the whole narrative of the Civil War was to free the states and all of that kind of stuff because I learned it in high school history.
Yeah.
And I bought all of that stuff until, and I don't remember, it may have even been somewhere around when I met Julia. Julia may have said something to me. I don't know, but it's been like 15 years ago. And it just hit me that I thought, you know what? I'm not looking at this right. And so I started going back, and I guess it was about the same time I started researching education and the roots of education in America. And I started realizing that what you were saying now was right. Now I didn't put it all together as well as you had, and I didn't understand that Lincoln was basically an authoritarian, and that's all he wanted. He wanted a big federal government. He was president, and he wanted, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, but he sounds like King Stitt, our current governor. To me, this just sounds like exactly, I like being in control. I feel like I'm the one that knows everything. So I'm going to take all the boards and repopulate all the boards with the people that I know are going to do what I say. It's kind of the same thing. Authoritarians want to authoritate. You know, they want everybody to, because they think they have all of the answers. And it makes me really, and I don't do this. So I will say the Pledge of Allegiance, but I will never, ever, ever say indivisible. I never say that word because we are not indivisible. We're not.
That has always caught my attention. Yeah, that word, indivisible. And obviously, when the pledge was written, which was well after the Civil War, that was a hat tip to the Civil War.
Well, it was a propaganda tool, and it bothers me. Last night I went to Enid to speak to the 2A group in Enid. I love them, and I was born in Enid, so I may not travel much anymore, but I will go back to Enid because I love them, and it's my home city.
I think Enid is one of the nicest small towns I've ever been to. I love Enid.
And you know what? They've even kept they're downtown. They've kept it and it's nice and it's the way I remember it when I was a kid growing up. And so I just like going there. I don't like all the windmills. I hate that, and driving home with all the red eyes staring at me.
Yeah.
Hate that part. But I love the people. And, these are really great people. And they're just like so many of Oklahomans that are just great people. And they love this country and they want to say that Pledge of Allegiance, but they say that every single time. And I'm like, guys, stop doing that, because it's a propaganda tool, and we say it without even understanding what it means anymore. And there are some times when I think I don't even want to say the Pledge of Allegiance at all, because we're not pledging. I mean, we're pledging allegiance to an idea, not 50 states under a central government, which is what the Pledge of Allegiance it seems to entail and impart.
Yeah, it's I mean I think the flag is it's supposed to be a representation of the country. So yeah, I think it's okay to pledge allegiance to the country, and the flag's an intermediary to that fact. I don't have any big beef with the Pledge of Allegiance, but yes, the indivisible line has always struck me. Now you mentioned that you're from Enid, right? Which I did not know. Are you familiar with Enid's tie to Lincoln?
And so is Ralph. Ralph was born there
Oh,
in
Ralph Crawford,
1951.
one of the greats of the game, also
Yeah.
from Enid.
Yeah.
Enid's producing some fine individuals.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
hey.
okay, so are you familiar with this story? And again, I could talk about this for hours, so don't let me. But the year's 1903, Enid, Oklahoma Territory.
I'm
Did you
not
look
that
at it?
old. Really, Spino?
I'm not saying you were there. I'm
Oh,
telling
okay.
you,
All right.
I'm saying in 1903. Okay, this guy named David E. George. He was kind of a drifter. You know where Garfield's Furniture is in downtown Enid, right on the town square, across from the courthouse.
No.
Okay, there's
Uh-uh.
Garfield's Furniture. So,
Okay.
okay, on Grand Avenue.
Yes.
That used to be the Grand Avenue Hotel. Okay, and it
Okay.
was kind of like a boarding house.
Okay.
In 1903, there was a guy staying there. Uh, um, One morning, he got up, went to the apothecary, like the pharmacist in
Mm-hmm.
town, and he bought strychnine, which apparently you could buy right off the shelf then. Okay, bought strychnine, went back to his room at the Grand Hotel, sprinkled a few grains of it into a glass of wine, like enough to kill 50 people, and downed it. Okay, he is in the throes of dying. He's committing suicide. People also at the hotel can hear him like gasping and struggling, and so they bust into the room. And as he's dying, this man confesses to the room that he is actually John Wilkes Booth.
No.
Yes. And Garfield's Furniture has preserved that room perfectly. They call it the death room. So if you go into Garfield's Furniture and talk to the owner, a guy named Russ Frazee, I don't know if you know him. He will give you a tour.
No.
And again, this is I could talk about this for hours. It's really fascinating. But yes, now 99% of historians do not believe it was in fact John Wilkes Booth, but it's still a fascinating story. The entire assassination story is fascinating, but that's a story for another day.
Well, I'm not sure about that. We're only at an hour, and we usually like to go as long as people like to stay on. But I do want to point out, we do need to have you come back to talk about Helen Keller, because Lisa was one of the ones that said, oh my gosh, I want to hear about that. And I do want to hear about Helen Keller. So we're definitely going to have to have you talk about that. So here's my question, though. How do you change all the years of propaganda? Because obviously we're all happy that the slaves were freed. I mean, the whole idea of anybody, and I'm Irish, one side of my whole family is Irish. We can trace back exactly where we came from, County Cork in Ireland. And I mean, we were almost worse than, the Irish were treated worse than Black people. And I mean, it was bad.
My grandfather came here from Sicily, And I could show you just reams of documents showing discrimination against Italians. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it was bad. I mean we said that we welcomed immigrants, and boy, in the late 1800s that was really a lie. I mean, because all we did was welcome them to treat them like garbage and make them, second and third and 14th class citizens. So
I'd say even worse, a lot of immigrants were really made slaves through
yes.
indentured servitude,
Oh,
where
indentured servants for sure.
you were beholden to the company. Everything you bought was from the company. Your home was owned by the company. You
Yeah.
worked for the company, and you never made more than you owed.
Yeah.
That's slavery. And
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. 100%.
and that persisted long after the Civil War.
It absolutely did. Oh, and Dorn says you have to narrate audiobooks.
Oh, if someone hands me the book and writes me a check, you got it.
There you go. Lisa said, my family is from County Mayo in Arlent, treated horribly. Yes. I mean, and it doesn't take away from slavery. I mean, slavery was a horrible practice. I mean, but
Without
we have
question.
to remember things that we don't remember in history. And that was that not only Black people were treated as slaves in America. There were, Italians and Irish people that were treated just as, I mean, badly and often worse in some cases. It
Right.
just depends.
And of course, the root of the word slave is Slav. Central Europeans and the Arab world enslaved millions of people from Poland and Eastern Europe, and they're called slaves from Slav. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
So it's not a unique institution to any race or ethnicity, and is of course slavery is horrible. No one questions that. I think the facts bear out that just like it did in every other country in the Western Hemisphere, slavery phased itself out, and we didn't need the institution of slavery because, as we had mentioned, in 1800 slavery was legal in every country in the Western
Yeah.
Hemisphere. In 1900 it was illegal
Right.
in every country. And yeah, we did not fight a war over slavery. We would have gotten rid of slavery like every other country did. We would have phased it out.
And I'm trying to think, there's and Robert says I can listen history for hours and the parallels to today are amazing. Honestly, the parallels that you drew with, I mean, I don't know whether I'm happy to realize that we didn't invent something horrid during COVID, or that we're stupid enough to keep doing the same stupid stuff. You know what I'm saying? I can't figure out how I feel about that, because some of the parallels that you drew were so unbelievably significant. It's disturbing. I
Right.
mean, it is kind of
Right.
disturbing.
And that's what blew me away as I was doing the research. It was like time after time, I was like, oh my God, this is what they're doing today. This is
Yeah.
the exact same thing. Yeah, it's uncanny. And I mean, go back to Genesis in the Bible. Human nature does not change. Circumstances change, technology changes, but human nature does not.
No, human nature is immutable. And I think it's interesting that you make that point, because from my perspective, that's part of the reason, that's part of a difference between conservative thought and liberal thought. I personally believe that liberals believe that people are good people. I mean, at heart, we're just good people, so yes, we're great. Most conservatives, and especially those who believe in the Bible, know that human beings are just despicable. If we weren't despicable, what in the world did Jesus come and go through all that horrible, grueling everything to save us from the bad things that we do? So there's a huge difference that plays out in politics, that plays out in, I mean, everything. From the people are just pretty much good, attaboy, good on you, mate, to the, I know I'm just a horrible person and I'm in need of somebody to make me better, and that person is the son of the creator of the universe. I mean, there's a huge difference there, and in just that one thought, and
Go
where
ahead.
all these things come from, I think.
Can I share a story along those lines? This is about
Absolutely. Hold on one second, though. Hold that thought. Robert says, yes, I've seen the parallels from the Bible. This evolving of humans is completely bogus. If we weren't despicable, we wouldn't need laws. That's Andrew says, wow, that's right. You cannot legislate back into the Garden of Eden. We live in a sinful and fallen world. And that is part of the reason why you see liberals kind of doing what they do. They just believe that humanity at its heart is goodness, and so that if you do this, everything's going to just suddenly work out, and the rest of us know that that's just ridiculous. We're all inherently bad. So go ahead, tell the story.
No foundation in truth in that whatsoever. This was maybe 2 years ago. I was having some drinks with a guy. It was kind of a professional meeting, but he's a friend, and we started talking. And he's not a believer. And we were talking about the inherent good or bad of humanity. And he would say, I think people are at their core they're good, and if given the opportunity, will do the right thing. And I was like, what are you basing that on? So it was okay. So the conversation evolved, and he said, so you're saying a little baby, an infant, is sinful? And I said, yes, absolutely. And this was a case I made. You can tell me whether it makes sense. I think it made sense to him, which was, I have kids. You have kids, right, Jenny? Okay. Picture your child at 2 or 3 years old, right? Did your child ever lie to you to get out of trouble?
Oh no, not my children. They were all angelic.
Exactly. Did your kids
How
ever?
did the lamp get broken? What? Nobody did anything and it just suddenly broke?
Not me. Yeah. Okay. So and has your child ever taken something that didn't belong to them? Yeah. Of course. I have 3 kids. Of course they all did. Now, did you teach your kids how to lie and steal? No. They figured that out all on their own. What you had to teach them was why you should be honest, why it's important to respect other people's property. Yes, of course, people are born selfish and evil. They have to be taught up in the word to combat that, and it's not an easy fight throughout your entire life, as we know. But if we were able to do it through works, we wouldn't need the grace of Jesus Christ. Not to get too heady on it. I'm not a theologian, but that's just my take on it.
No, but I mean, and so much of that stuff, I mean, when you put it in the right context and you think of people the way that we should be thinking about them and not the way that we wish they were, then the whole idea and notion of what you just told us about Lincoln does make sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it does, because there are people out there who want power. That's what they want. There are people who believe that they know better than you. And by God, they're going to make you believe that if you don't automatically believe that on your own. And we saw that during COVID with governments, and now you've just paralleled all of that with what happened in the Civil War. And I don't know. It's so. We've got. Hold on. We've got more comments now.
Can I just say, just to your point, real quickly?
Sure.
Is that yes? That mentality is ridiculous, because you cannot build peace and justice on fantasies. The only way to build peace and justice is by eliminating people who make peace and justice impossible. My theory. Go ahead.
Clipping that one. That's correct.
I
I
get
mean,
a
that's
clip.
perfect.
Right.
Well said. Beautifully said. Okay, so Sarah says, Julia C., we are one nation in the United States, united for commerce, regulations, transportation, rules, and resources, united in military service for defense of our country. So yeah, Sarah, I mean, there are things that the federal government does kind of for all the states or with all the states. I'm not sure how you would exactly do that, but the point of the matter is that, and I mess this up every time. It wasn't Jefferson who said it. It was another one of the founders who said that the states are crucibles of innovation, invention. And it was the Jeffersonian concept, but it wasn't Jefferson who said that. Okay. And that is exactly what the whole idea behind this country was supposed to be. You're a state, you're a state, you're a state. If you can do some things together and you want to, fine, but your individual states, Louisiana is never going to be Oklahoma, is not going to be Utah. I mean, there are differences in geography, in topography, in all kinds sociology that make these things different, and putting them under one system, under one thumb, creates more problems than it solves, is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I mean, political science 101, what defines a country? Language, border, culture. Those are the three things that define a country: language, border, culture. And a lot of Europeans will say this when they come to the US, it's kind of like 50 different countries.
Right.
Yeah. But obviously we need a federal government for interstate commerce, to resolve disputes between the states, national defense. I don't know any conservative who argues against the existence of the federal government. The argument is, what should the role of the federal government be?
Exactly. So Ralph says, good Sunday school lesson. And Reagan says, this is one reason Marxism doesn't work. It ignores the inherent depravity of mankind. And I completely agree with that. Oh, Andrew must have missed the beginning part. Andrew, it's up on YouTube when we're finished, and on Rumble, so you can go back and rewatch it. It's great.
Not much. We didn't talk about Lincoln.
It was great. Stop that, Speno. We have so many now that get stuck in the toddler way of thinking me. And even, I think, worse today.
Okay,
Dave and I were talking about that this morning.
Julia, you're right about that, but that's not new. That has been the nature of humanity from day one.
Yeah, it's true. This is one reason communism doesn't work. It ignores the supposed to be 50 sovereign states, right? Arrested in that stage until adulthood, when an outside agency, police, employer, etc., forces them to understand how unacceptable it is. And you know what? That makes 100% sense. And Cam thinks so too. That so many people don't even think on this concept until something happens to them. This is one of my favorite things, and I wish Michael were on, because he'd say the same thing. I know he would, and he'd start gesticulating wildly.
If I ever come back, I demand that Michael's here.
I know, and I'm sorry for that, because you guys would have been great. I wouldn't have gotten a word in edgewise, which would have been great.
I'm a big Grande fan.
But he oh gosh, now I'm off on the oh yes, he would have said about flock cameras, and about how, they catch you in this web, and talked about like the one guy who got pulled over for no real reason, and the cop, we've got the video up on the YouTube channel. But it's like, until something like that happens and you're stuck in the back of the police car knowing that you didn't do anything wrong and that your constitutional rights are being violated, they're like, wait a minute, something is afoul here. And I think we've got to get to the point where people have got to look, skeptically, critically, at least. I mean, and I agree, we don't want to all be cynical, and I feel like I'm kind of getting to the cynical side. because just of everything that I've seen and the fact that people don't listen and they don't want to study. They don't want to find this stuff out for themselves. They want to go, well, that's what my history teacher said, and then you're done and that discussion's over. And they don't want to stop and think to themselves, oh gosh, I wonder if that's true. Maybe I should go look that up.
And I think you're pointing out another fundamental truth about humanity, which is it is much easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they have been fooled.
Say that again.
It is much easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they have been fooled.
Why is that? That's so true.
Self-preservation? I'm not sure. I don't know. That's a question
that's even fascinating to think about because
that's
you're
a question for Dr.
Right.
Phil.
Yeah. That's just okay. So hold on. We've got some more comments that are fun. Actually, I can argue about the existence of the federal government.
In its current form, I can see that.
Argue against the existence of a federal government. Hold my beer. Sarah says, Julia, yes, let's help it get back there to the proper state of the state. 100%, Sarah. I'm very interested to see the decentralization of the Department of Ed returning appropriate powers to the states. I don't think that's going to happen. One of these days we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And Ralph says, yes.
I thought the goal, rather than decentralization, was dissolution of the federal education department.
Yeah, but we have to have I'm going to have somebody on that we can, really argue about this, because and when I say argue, I don't mean scream and yell and hate each other. That's not what I mean by argue. I mean, like in a court of law, argue. Well, this and this. I mean, that's the only way we learn, really, is to hear both sides of an argument. I think this, you think this, let's talk about it.
That's why the First Amendment exists.
Yeah. So we need to have somebody on that I can argue with about this, because my personal opinion on this is not Trump bad. I'm not going there. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying shutting down the federal Department of Education is not going to stop the ESEA and the other federal laws that have been in existence for years and years and years. That has to be stopped. And until you stop that, you're just moving these parts to different agencies that are already there, which doesn't invalidate the problems that we're having. It just closes an agency. Do you see my point?
I do.
Mm-hmm. And that I need to have somebody who really knows federal education law that I can argue with about that, because I think we've got I'm having trouble. I don't want to be overcritical of what Trump is doing, because I definitely think he has way better, 100% better ideas than Biden in so many cases. But I think we've got to be really cautious about looking at Trump and going, yeah, Trump, he's got all the answers. We got to not do that.
That's a dangerous road to go down for anyone. Yeah, for any leader. The blind following. Yeah, of course, I'm a huge Trump fan.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean I like everything he does. And again, the goal in any project is never perfection. It's excellence. That should be the standard we're shooting for.
Right. No, I completely concur. So, okay, hold on. I love the comments. I love our viewers. They're so great. Yes. They're still sending all the money from the feds. And that's exactly the part of the point that I was trying to make, which is why we've got to parse and discuss. Yeah. Debate. And it's a step in the right direction. I'm not going to argue with you, Andrew, because you're right. I mean, I'm not going to take that away. But we just have to make sure that what we're doing isn't thinking we solved a problem that we didn't solve.
Yeah. Now, I have to say that education is not my area of expertise in any way. So, I can't really discuss in any kind of depth what the Department of Education does and how it plays out. But
and I'll find somebody who really knows federal student education and see if I can't find them. If somebody knows them, hook them up with me so we can debate about this, because It's a real concern that I have. It doesn't matter if you close the building if all of the pieces are still in place. That just doesn't solve the problem. It just means we've downsized and or we've eliminated an agency. That doesn't mean we've eliminated the problems that we have, because if we're still going to keep the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is, the original federal education law, which forces states to do this and that and the other thing in order to get federal funds, we're nowhere better than we were really before we actually closed the building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And these, I mean, while we're being iconoclastic, let's go ahead and talk about Ronald Reagan. One of the worst things that happened with the federal government was something that Reagan did. And it started with withholding federal highway funds until all states raised their drinking age to 21.
Oh my gosh, did Reagan do that?
Sure did. Because, you remember the big anti drunk driving campaign in
Oh
the
no,
80s.
yeah.
Yeah. And so suddenly there was this big
Because
popular.
I was 18 when you could drink at 18.
I drank at 18, but it wasn't legal for me to do so.
Oh, wow. Well, it was legal for me. And I did it frequently. Much to my parents' chagrin. Okay, hold on. One more. Debate. Yes, Rhonda.
Hey, Rhonda.
And yeah, debate, argue, however that is. But I mean, discuss. I just feel like, and you know what? I miss that. And I mean, I'm a hard one to debate because, and I'm readily, I know my foibles, and they are many. And one of them is that I'll just, I'll debate until you can't even stand up anymore, because, if I feel like I'm right about something, now we can debate and you may change my mind. I mean, it's actually happened before, for sure. But if I feel like I'm right about something, I'll just debate you until you can't draw breath anymore. I don't know when to stop.
Debate through attrition. Yeah.
Do what?
Debate through attrition.
Yeah. I'll win because I just talk you into the ground. But I do think...
well, a lot of the problems with debating people is people take it so personally.
People what?
People take it so personally when you disagree with them. It's I just kind of I learned this the hard way over several years, is that on stuff like this you have to weigh what's more important, being right or the relationship. So.
Look what Cam says.
I've seen it. All right.
Lisa says I'll argue with you, but the problem with you, Lisa, is there's not much to argue with. So it was legal for me, so we started at 15. That's funny. And Andrew was amening something, but I don't remember what it was. Sorry, Andrew, I didn't get it up there.
I'm sure it was something brilliant. Yeah.
But I do feel like we just, and that's exactly what you said a second ago is exactly the point. I may be forceful when I argue, but I'm not going to not like you. I mean, I'm not going to go, well, I just don't like you because we don't agree. I mean, I can't, I mean, you would have to do so many more things to make me not like you than just disagree with me. I mean, but that's not the way so many people are.
Yeah.
I mean, I've argued with so many people, even on our, who are my friends. We argue about a lot. I'm still their friend. I just don't agree with this or that or the other thing. And I don't know how to get back to that. That's the thing, Andrew. How do we get back to that?
Get back to what? Healthy public debate?
Correct.
Well, I mean, I guess I'd start with, choose your enemies wisely.
Oh, good.
The people that you debate, like you said, you don't take it personally, and I don't when I debate with people, but so many people do. Yeah. So to me, just kind of the gauge that I go by is what's more important, being right or the relationship.
Yeah.
If a cashier shorts me $10 on change, I'm going to argue with her because being right is more important than the relationship.
Right.
But if, like, my brother shorted me $10 on something, I'd probably just let it go
Yeah.
because the relationship's more important than being right.
No, I mean, absolutely. But then there's the other point that I was thinking about when you were saying that if you don't have a relationship where you can argue and not have to agree all the time, I don't know that that's a real relationship either.
I think that's called it's called marriage, isn't
Not here because I'm always right.
it? There's nothing to argue about.
My poor husband. I love him so much. He puts up with so much of my garbage. Listen, that's a big deal. What Andrew said, the relationship should be more than the debate. 1867, when President Andrew Johnson signed legislation creating the first Department of Education, its main purpose was to collect information and statistics about the nation's schools. That's 100% correct.
Oh,
Denise,
I
hi,
didn't know
Denise. I
that.
just saw Denise last night, and it was so good to see you. And so good to see you again here. Is debate different from an argument? That's a good question.
Yeah. I think the distinction is an argument is personal and a debate is theoretical or.
Oh, really? Do you think
eh,
so?
I think so. I mean, I hadn't this is off the top of my head. I guess that's the differentiation I would make between a debate and an argument. And plus, an argument is unproductive. A debate is productive.
Well, maybe it's just
I'd
me
I'd have
thinking
to pull
about
out the Merriam-Webster's. And,
when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So because
right.
I like to argue or I like to debate, I guess I just see it as I don't know. I mean, that's a really interesting question. Yes, you are right. Dave is a good man. I don't deserve him most of the time. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter proposed reinstating a cabinet level Department of Education in order to establish policy for administering and coordinating most federal assistance to education, collect data in U.S. schools, and to enforce federal education laws regarding privacy and civil rights. Yes, and Carter was the one who gave us that, which was, yeah.
Oh,
So it's
and
not
that's
new,
also hold on.
and that's true.
Can you go back to that previous comment
Yes,
about
this one.
Carter's? Yeah, I'm learning all this for the first time.
Oh, really?
But I do know, because I was of the age at the time, that that is right about the time that busing began.
Yes.
7980. Yep. Um,
Yes. Oh,
okay.
hey, Andrew just put this in, and I'm going to go to this one really fast. Denise said, Denise McIntyre, you have arguments in court. I think it just comes down to the spirit underlying the debate. And that's what you said too, Andrew.
Well,
So
I think he says it better. I think that's, yeah. I think that
well, the
nails
two
it.
Andrews are right,
Per usual.
per usual, because you begin with A. Yeah, so it's not new. Cam says one is formal with structure and the other has no boundaries. That's
Okay.
another good one.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that one
That's a really good
too. Good
point.
job,
Yeah.
Cam. Like that one. But you argue a point, so I think it's become a negative word. I like this discussion. Debate and argument, it depends on the two people involved. And then what Andrew said. So that was some interesting, interesting conversation about argument versus.
That's it, Jen. A hammerhead, says Ralph Crawford.
Ralph's known me a long time, so he definitely knows that that's. Oh, sorry. Let's go back to history. Okay. Thank you, Julia, for getting us back on the topic. So and plus it's 1:30, so we probably need to close out anyway.
Yeah. I probably need to
So
beat
let me
feed him.
ask you this question. I mean,
No.
what we learned today, I believe it is profound. I think it's profound. And the reason why is because that the person in that President Lincoln, that we have put up on this pedestal and made this one thing that isn't really true,
Like
caused our
a deity.
government.
We treat him like a deity. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, and it caused us to start believing in a central power of the government that isn't what the founders intended, nor the Constitution really says. So, Andrew, I think your presentation is super important for people to see because of that reason. But now once people have seen it and heard it, because they can go back and see it on our, on our channels, it will be up there for people to rewatch and watch the first time. How do we move beyond this? How do we get our legislators to understand this? How do we get people to understand this so that we can move forward in the right, the historically correct way?
I don't have the answer to that. I'm not sure anyone does. But it's, it's like the book Catch 22, where you suddenly learn everything you've been taught is a lie. Um, I would say, yeah, greet everything that you're told, no matter what, by who tells it to you, with some degree of healthy skepticism. And have I framed my worldview based on truth? And there's nothing wrong with going back and re-examining for truth. Science is the pursuit of truth. A lot of people think that Christianity or religion and science are in conflict with one another. They're not. Science is a search for truth, and the truth always leads back to God. So the pursuing truth will never come to a bad end. It's kind of who, oh gosh, who, this is actually funny. I thought of a quote and then I realized, who said it was Abraham Lincoln.
Oops.
And the quote, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, and this is from one of the Lincoln Douglas debates. He said, "If I'm going down, I'm going down with the truth."
Oh.
Which, even though he didn't live by that, I think as far as a philosophy, that's a healthy one.
Well, and I completely agree with that. But I do think, I mean, we have a really nice audience on here this morning, even on Rumble. Good morning, everybody on Rumble. We have a nice audience. And I think what we have to do is just like with everything else that we learn from the guests on our program, we have to not just internalize it. If we don't take it out and we don't say it, because I said something to Denise last night about the pledge and why I don't say indivisible. Mm-hmm. And I try to say that when I go places and I'm, saying the Pledge of Allegiance and I say, hey, I don't say this. And here's the reason why I don't say this. I think we have to take those options where we have them in discussions with other people, not to be ugly, but just to enlighten other people and say, hey, this is why I don't do this. Have you looked into that? Because it's not going to, nothing's going to change when we become educated, but then we internalize that education. That doesn't change anything. It has to get out from us. We have to be able to say, to enlighten our neighbors and our friends and our family, without, being a hammer, but at least, getting it out there. So I think if that answers my own question, that's probably the best thing, because I do believe that educated people make better choices, and those better choices help us all to live better.
Yeah,
So,
and I think you're speaking to why shows like yours are so important, because who else would give me this opportunity to spout this blasphemy, um, when this is an free and open exchange of ideas, and if we have that, at least the hope is the truth will rise to the top and people will act on the truth, not on things that are not only untrue, but that people who are telling you know it's untrue.
and they're telling you for a purpose. They're telling you
Right.
something untruthful for a purpose.
Right. Yeah. Why did Fauci encourage people to wear 3 masks at once, knowing on record at the beginning of the pandemic saying these paper masks are totally ineffective? He must have had a reason for deliberately lying to people. And while generally it's kind of unfair to speculate on people's motives, it is perfectly fair to ask people what their motives are and then see if that aligns with the truth.
Oh, fair enough. Oh, absolutely, for sure. Okay, well, we've got a couple other comments and then we'll sign off for today. But honestly, I so enjoyed this so much.
Well, this is fun. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no, thank you for coming. Lisa says a debate is a noun or a verb, but an argument is only a noun. Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
Okay.
Kim, you can have arguments in court with rules. You can also have an Oxford style debate with rules. Oh, and hey, Michael tuned in. Michael must be listening.
Oh, all
We miss
right.
you, Michael. If it hasn't been said yet, the history of Lincoln is a perfect example of how the victors get to write history. You did say that in the narrative that they want spun. And that's a good, thank you for bringing that up, Michael. I appreciate that. But Speno actually did say that. Is thinking different from believing? I don't know. That's another good question.
Well,
Great show, Jen and Speno and everyone on the feed. I tried to tell her some of this. That's true. I'm not going to lie. Not going to lie. I'd rather be George Washington. I'm not going to lie. And that's true. Tyrants are often good actors. Yeah. David says frequently, my husband frequently says that he feels like so many politicians are sociopaths. I mean,
yeah, and I'll tell you a big mistake people make is calling people on the other side stupid. Take Hillary Clinton. You can call Hillary Clinton a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them. She is brilliant. That's what makes her so dangerous. Don't dismiss these people as stupid. They're not. They're smart and they are determined. And when you have bad intentions, that's a dangerous combination.
Oh, well said. Speno, well said. Didn't Reagan remove liability? Oh, he did. He did do that too. Stop running down my guy. I tried to make this comment earlier when you were talking about Reagan, but Facebook kept taking me to a different video. Oh my gosh. It's sad. We're still not talking about the things that need to be talked about, which is sad. God instructed man to subdue the earth. Science is a means to subdue the earth. However, science has been overtaken by evil. Lots of things have been taken over by evil.
Yeah, and that's why I love this podcast. Have you ever seen trust science? I trust science.
Didn't you hear Groner talk about that the other day?
Yeah, I trust science. I don't trust scientists. Yeah.
And Dr. Groner said we've made science a god.
Oh, yeah, and that, I mean, historically, if you went back, you could really trace that back to the plague. And if you want me on to talk about the plague, I can talk about that for hours too.
Well, definitely, we're going to work up something on Helen Keller because I think everybody wants to hear about that.
I'd much rather talk about the Lincoln assassination and its ties to Enid, Oklahoma. We can do both, but yeah, I guess I'm booking myself for the next several months on this show.
You apparently are, and that's fine with me. Enlightening, yay, good, great show, yay.
Hey, just real quick, can I ask Denise a question?
Yes.
Are you related to Noble and Kirsten McIntyre? Let's see if we have time for her to answer.
We'll get down to the bottom. Great show. Believing means by your life. That's interesting. Not stupid, wicked. There you go, Speno. That's the difference right there. We did something that made Cam say, wow. Reagan did this under threat from the vaccine manufacturers, and that, I mean, could have been very well. Andrew said, people are not wrong simply and only because they are evil or because they are stupid. Some people are just wrong. Yeah. If we think that, then we trick ourselves into thinking that we are never wrong. And that's, I don't know, there's something to be said for that, because I think that's the other problem that we do not. And Denise said, nope.
Oh, okay. Okay. Fair enough.
And Ralph said, we want more Speno.
Words I have never heard from my wife, but okay.
There you go. At least it's not, we want more Speedo.
Yeah. Nobody wants that.
Sorry, I just couldn't help that. Well, after we get off of here, we'll sign you up for next month and get you on the podcast, and we'll let you decide what you want to talk about. But yeah, for sure.
Okay.
At least Ralph thought I was funny.
I'd like to thank your audience for engaging and not calling me a lunatic for saying this stuff.
No, and I'm going to do this again as we sign off here because I believe it in my bones. I think the people who, we don't have hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, thousands of people who watch this podcast.
Well, not yet.
Yeah, but I don't even care because because the people who watch this podcast are intelligent and intellectual. So both, okay? They're open-minded and they're willing to rethink their thoughts and do something about it. They're willing to engage the population. They're willing to engage their friends and family. They're willing to engage their legislators. Who could want a better audience than that?
No one.
I love our audience. They're absolutely phenomenal. And he says, here, Lisa's just the best.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
So we're good. Again, I love you all so much. You're just the best. And I so appreciate you very much. And again, our show wouldn't be anything without our phenomenal guests. So Andrew Speno, thank you. You're like the brother I never had. You and Michael are the brothers I never had.
I consider that an honor. Thank you. But I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on. This
well, absolutely. And again, as soon as we get off of here, we will create something for next month and you can come back and do some history. And I do believe that part of the reason why people loved this so much. Oh, and Kyle says, and plus we love Spino's Brady background. But I think people,
this is just my house. Okay. In 1972.
No, it's what I wished my house to be in 1972 for sure.
If this were actually my house, I'd be the happiest person on earth. But go
no
ahead.
Kidding. And that house is still real. It's in California.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's real. Despite the fact there's only one bathroom upstairs. Yeah. It would...
That's true. We're all 6 kids out of Sharon.
All 6 kids.
But I do think part of the reason people like the show is because we do try to give perspectives that you're not going to normally see and things that will challenge you and make you think. And you've definitely done that for us today, Speno, and we appreciate you so much.
Well, thanks.
And you guys, we are going to be back here live at 1:00. If you followed Oklahoma Doge, not the real Oklahoma Doge or fake Oklahoma Doge, which is the one run by our state. But
can I say something on that real quick?
Doge,
just that people need to know about the official Oklahoma Doge, that they decided to set that up in OMES. If you read the last federal single audit that Cindy Bird did, you wouldn't put OMES in charge of your change drawer. It's absurd. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we'll have a show on ohms then, because there's plenty of things to say about ohms and about Doge, but we like the grassroots Doge, and she's going to be on with us at 1:00 today. So cool. Stick around. If you don't have anything to do, please tune back in at 1:00. We'd love to see you then. And then hang on for next month, and I will get Mr. Speno on the calendar for next month, and we'll hear from him again. So thanks again for being with us. And if you can't tune in at 1, have a great weekend, and we'll see you again Wednesday at 9 a.m. Thanks so much.